When your home is being raided or being taken by force, sometimes you cannot help but recklessly charge into a bloodthirsty army and hope for the best, even though the outcome of the battle is already decided before you even draw your sword. As out of nowhere as that sounds, Ghost of Tsushima starts just like that, at the very edge of catastrophe, with Tsushima Island standing as the lone barrier between feudal Japan and a massive Mongol invasion seeking to conquer the land of the rising sun, and maybe the whole world if time permits. Set in 1274, during the Kamakura period of Japan, you take control of Jin Sakai, a fierce samurai noble born into a strict code of honor whose world is shattered in a single night following a desperate battle to slow the enemy's advance. The opening launches you head first into a brave last stand against an overwhelming force of savages. The sea is filled with warships, the entire country is engulfed in a raging war, and your men are falling one by one with you completely powerless to stop the treachery. After surviving the battle by no less than a miracle, you wake up with your mortal wounds healed but your spirit unbroken, and your role now is to gather your strength and devise a plan to rescue your uncle, a master samurai, from the clutches of the enemy and ultimately liberate Tsushima and its people before it is too late. From the very first moments, there are flames coating the horizon, the moonlit sky disturbed by shouting in a strange language, with the winds carrying a sense that tradition alone won't be enough to hold back the tide this time around. In other words, it's a story about the death of one way of life and the birth of another, whether the inhabitants of Tsushima are ready to embrace what it takes to survive or not. What makes this setup so incredibly compelling is that beneath the unbridled violence and tales of bloodshed across once peaceful fields, lies a surprisingly complex story about wrestling with pride, identity, and the very definition of honor itself. The Mongol leader and main antagonist, General Khotun Khan, is a calculating manipulator whose arrival laid bare the weaknesses of the Japanese culture through despicable actions meant to shatter any will to resist. This blazing introduction fractures the samurai ideals from the inside out, forcing the remaining few survivors, including Jim himself, to confront the uncomfortable reality that noble traditions cannot always stop ruthless pragmatism, and that dire situations require more than mere goodwill to overcome. As Jin grows for an eventual rematch against Khotun Khan a couple of chapters later, it's more and more clear that he slowly becomes the very embodiment of the kamikaze, a force of nature that sweeps through the Mongol ranks with endless fury, said to be what drove the Mongols off of Japan twice in real life. Ferocious yet disciplined, he's both savior and storm, being quite literally the divine wind of salvation taken human form. His strikes carries the inevitability of a typhoon, unstoppable, cleansing, and no doubt merciless to those who stand in defiance. Shifting our focus elsewhere, the island itself is a large canvas painted with quiet tragedy and fleeting beauty, where every gust of wind leaves little room for mistaking the scale of the storm you voluntarily stepped into. Put simply, your allies are scattered, your clan decimated, your methods questioned at every turn, accompanied by the push to adapt before everything collapses. It begins as a classic revenge quest but quickly expands into something a lot deeper than expected, showing what happens when one man with practically nothing left to lose decides to bend the rules to fight on his own terms. The truth is, this is not Japan against the fearsome Mongol Empire, but just an angry man standing his ground against an entire army, and believe it or not, he actually likes those odds. This is Ghost of Tsushima in a nutshell for you, a game that distinguishes itself by framing its conflict over historical background as much more than a slow-burning struggle for survival along with a cool setting than first appearances may falsely lead you to believe. So, by the time you found the breeze of the wind grace your face, soaked in the atmosphere, and seen the stakes ahead, it becomes wholly evident that so much was lost, but despite all of that, Tsushima still feels like a place worth fighting for, even if the journey ahead won't be an easy one. That's to say, this isn't just another soulless open-world action game, but rather a meticulously crafted war drama with an impressive historical fidelity, and the foundation it lays in these opening hours sets the stage for a journey that's both intimate and grand, where the sword you carry is just as heavy as the burden placed on your shoulders. Following an utterly revolting series of events, once the dust of the opening sequence drifts away, Tsushima reveals its true colors, trading bombastic spectacle for a world that teaches you how to read it through subtle cues as opposed to numerous waypoints and flashing icons. Going over the basics, the first thing you notice is that the environment itself moves to guide your step, with the wind literally pointing the way towards objectives, villagers you meet whispering rumors that lead you to hidden quests and special locations, golden birds draw your attention to secrets, and distant plumes of smoke tempt your curiosity. It's a kind of environmental communication that makes you pay closer attention to what really matters, the world around you, rather than creating layers of distraction with intrusive UI like it's all too common nowadays. Giving exploration a sense of natural flow that many open worlds fail to capture. Look around to see the foliage sway with the passing wind as if the land is breathing alongside you, its every motion hinting at where you should go next, like invisible hands leading the way. The genius of the system is that you're not being led by the nose like a stringed puppet, with this guidance system striking a rare balance that never feels out of place or artificial, quietly pulling you forward and letting curiosity be the compass. Similarly, combat exploration, character growth, and narrative beats are all built the same way, designed to keep players anchored to the world itself rather than endless menus or distracting pop-ups. What really surprised me was how rarely the side content felt like filler. Every quest, even the smallest randomest errands you find in the middle of nowhere when aiding nameless commoners, seems to have a human pulse behind it, as the world doesn't just populate itself with generic objectives but with stories that echo the island's central themes of loss and resistance. While some missions still feel relatively plain, often having you play detective to solve mysteries, the story payoff usually redeems them, grounding the adventure in something tangible rather than hollow fetch quests or meaningless tasks. Truth be told, Ghost of Tsushima is the kind of game where you end up spending more time admiring the superb ambience, composing haikus at scenic lookouts, cutting bamboo in annoying minigames, and bathing in hot springs under maple trees to raise your max health than wondering about what to do next. A level of immersion that makes abusing fast travel feel like shitting yourself out of such a marvelous experience. In that sense, horseback travel feels quite great for its intended purpose of, getting around. But unfortunately, I must say that the horse never really evolved into anything beyond that, serving purely as a reliable means of transportation and nothing else. But that's honestly all it needed to be anyways. And beyond the scenic allure and gorgeous vistas, the game also shows a massive knack for using its entire world to establish a strong emotional and narrative undercurrent. From burnt-out villages with corpses littering the streets to scarred communities where life still continues under the shadow of occupation, the aftermath of battles lingers everywhere with remnants of a culture that's been brutalized but hasn't fully vanished yet. Though the land is slowly healing with every victory, the world never stops reflecting the conflict, which makes even quiet moments hum with unspoken tension. After the electrifying prologue, the game settles into a slower, more meditative rhythm to let you catch a momentary break. It's a somewhat abrupt tonal shift, and for some, this change of pace is refreshing, giving space for players to breathe, to wander around, and reflect on this transformation. But for others, it might feel like the momentum dips a bit too sharply, especially if you rush through the story without embracing the game's quieter moments, which are where lots of the real enjoyment actually come from. Personally, I found this vibe switch quite fitting, as not only does it mirror Jin's steady evolution, but the calmness of it also doesn't let the game become too frenetic with no room to absorb the ambience and revel in the gifts of nature that only solitude can bring. Where Ghost of Tsushima really impresses though is in how its systems are arranged to encourage player involvement without forcing things down our throat. Pretty much every other mechanic can be ignored if you wish, but one way or another they all feed into a cohesive loop that rewards engagement the more you're willing to embrace all of its features. This flexibility gives players room to shape their journey without feeling punished for trying out an unconventional playstyle or focusing on a tighter set of tools. That said, the game's world building and core systems aren't entirely flawless, highlighting that the game isn't immune to common genre pitfalls. For instance, a few examples of moments where the illusion becomes apparent are things like NPC behaviors looping unnaturally, controls and movement that feel stiff sometimes, and scripted events that repeat often enough that they start to feel recycled. Aside from that, some of the side content can lean into formulaic patterns that contrast with the elegance of the main journey, and even exploration becomes stale after a while, not always yielding good rewards, with a few too many activities paying out in forgettable collectibles or basic crafting materials, which is quite underwhelming for going through so many hoops and loops. And unrelated, but a cool fact is that for those less inclined to follow subtitles, the game offers an English dub that's impressively well performed, though it slightly dilutes the authenticity of its Japanese setting, at least in my humble opinion. I speak only for myself, but I think the real magic lies in the original language, as every line delivery carries cultural nuance that fits the era's tone perfectly. Still, having the choice lets players tailor the experience whether they want the authenticity or accessibility, which is a win-win regardless of your preferences. What's clear is that beneath the surface level allure of its samurai fantasy, Ghost of Tsushima is built with the restraint to let itself be felt rather than shouting for attention. It doesn't reinvent the wheel by any means, but it polishes it to a mirror shining places, then leave a few scuffs untouched elsewhere, those imperfections giving it a much needed texture. As the journey unfolds, these small nuances become the lens through which the game turns into a remarkably cohesive and atmospheric experience that lingers long after you sheath your blade. Despite first impressions, wielding a katana and looking cool while slicing enemies in half like your fruit ninja isn't all there is to do in Ghost of Tsushima. Every encounter plays like a tense gamble with your life on the line, where hesitation costs blood and overconfidence earns you a quick trip back to your last checkpoint. What initially seems like a straightforward hack and slash quickly reveals itself as a deep, coordinated dance where every strike matters. Combat is snappy and smooth, with realistic attack animation selling a convincing fantasy of being a trained warrior that relies on sheer will to heal and even resist certain death, also amateur swinging a pointy stick and hoping for the best. With that in mind, the game builds its foundation on a combat system that strikes a measured balance between accessibility and intensity, with timing, spacing, and adaptability dictating your success as opposed to frantic button mashing. In that vein, the core of the swordplay lies in the sense mechanics, as Jin can seamlessly switch between different attack patterns, each tailored to counter certain enemy types, where instead of constantly swapping weapons, you deepen your understanding of a single pair of blades, evolving its techniques over time. Each stance has its quirks. Some excel at breaking shields, others disrupting spear thrusts, and mastering their flows as much about reading your opponents as it is about remembering what each stance does so you can switch to the right one with confidence. It's a creative and majorly effective way to keep combat engaging across dozens of hours, where instead of relying on a massive weapon variety, the game instead deepens the utility of its signature weapons while encouraging you to read enemy groups and adapt on the fly. As battles grow larger and more chaotic, switching stances mid-fight becomes second nature, allowing you to carve through waves of Mongol soldiers like a hot knife cutting through butter. One of the game's smartest systems by a long shot, rewarding mastery without drowning you with unnecessary clutter. That said, a personal niche pick of mine is the lack of a proper lock-on can occasionally make battles messier than intended. When you're trying to chase down a single retreating target, Jin sometimes swings at the wrong foe, frustratingly breaking the flow of an otherwise razor-sharp system. Then on top of that, there's the standoff mechanic, arguably the game's most anime-like feature. Before many encounters, you can challenge enemies out for a one-on-one strike that rewards patience and timing with a devastating opening advantage. Later upgrades turn them into sequential takedowns where you can dispatch multiple foes in a chain of stylish little single slashes, with the trade-off that if you fail, you'll be on the receiving end of that exchange, as it is only fair. But of course, the game doesn't lock you into the rigid box of traditional swordsmanship. As the story progresses, Jin's arsenal also expands, reflecting his moral evolution as he strays from the rigid samurai code, allowing players to lean into a sneakier approach. That's where stealth comes in, assassinations being clean, swift, and brutal, and sneaking through tall grass, silently eliminating targets reshapes combat encounters into opportunities for strategic infiltrations, which is a nice alternative to direct confrontation. The stealth mechanics themselves aren't particularly outlandish, but their strength lies in how organically they mesh with the open combat. Enemy detection is reasonably fair, focusing on highlights potential isolated targets, and staying out of sight is generally quite easy, in turn allowing for a slower yet effective way to expand your tactical options. These elements come together to create flexible encounters where slipping through enemy camps unseen can feel just as thrilling as cleaving through them head-on. A minor note is that the game doesn't shy away from throwing some good moral tension your way, with Jin's closest allies questioning his methods as his tactics get more ruthless, with every gruesome assassination carrying a word of judgment and seemingly tarnishing your reputation, reminding you that playing dirty is viewed highly even when done out of necessity. On the other hand, ranged tools and ghost weapons such as kunai, smoke bombs, sticky bombs, bows, and even a grappling hook for mobility add another layer to our toolkit, giving Jin ways to disrupt enemies and control the flow of battle from afar. From a well-timed kunai that can interrupt a heavy brute mid-swing to smoke bombs which create space when you're outnumbered, these tools evolve steadily through upgrades, but the game wisely avoids overcomplicating their management unnecessarily. There's enough variety to keep encounters dynamic, but not so much that it turns every fight into a juggling act, as the presence merely reinforces Jin's unconventional methods without disrupting the main attraction. Now, in terms of progression, the skill trees and gear upgrades are fairly straightforward, offering meaningful improvements tied directly to your growth in multiple gauges. The aforementioned stances can be augmented with combo strikes and made more powerful, legendary combat arts bring deadly techniques to Jin's arsenal, while charms provide passive stat boosts to fine-tune your playstyle. In short, the game introduces RPG elements with just enough restraint to keep you invested, ensuring the focus remains on refining your core abilities at the same time as it gives you points to spend on skills and perks by growing your own legend. Then there's the armor set, where each piece isn't only stylish but often carries the story of a legendary warrior who once wore it in times of old. Being another essential part of what makes the system so awesome, especially as you never know what you find next. Aside from head and mask slots, which are purely cosmetic, the gear system elevates the coolness factor of the game, as not only do they improve our stats through a few useful bonus perks, they also complement Jin's transformation into an unbeatable warrior, even changing visually as you upgrade them as specialized myths, which is a really nice touch. Whether you play as an ironclad samurai or a silent ronin, the progression suits all appearance and gameplay needs, making every upgrade match your identity and preferences as opposed to being just a basic numbers boost. If anything, a minor annoyance in relation to progression is how elite enemies stop offering anything useful once you have unlocked all stances, since there is very little progress to be made after that. While it makes sense mechanically, it leads to later encounters feeling hollow since the game kind of stops acknowledging your improvements as a warrior, which, not gonna lie, is a little bit lame. And speaking of which, enemy variety also plays its too important part in keeping combat interesting. While not instantly varied with everyone looking more or less the exact same, the roster of foes is diverse enough to constantly challenge you to adjust statics from time to time. Bandits ambush roadsides, Mongol soldiers attacking coordinated formations, and wild animals add a layer of unpredictability for when you're out cruising empty fields. Aside from that, it's also worth noting that encounters can get somewhat repetitive after a while, but thankfully enemies evolve with new tricks, getting progressively stronger alongside ourselves, so we're constantly challenged even after acquiring multiple upgrades, though by that point we're already almost completely unstoppable. As everything falls into place, it's fair to say Ghost of Tsushima doesn't break new ground in the genre, but it polishes familiar systems to a level of responsiveness and cohesion that many games struggle to reach. I liked a lot how Jin's evolving toolkit mirrors his narrative arc, shifting from a rigid samurai to a cunning ghost-like figure, and that alignment between gameplay growth and story progression is one of the game's biggest strengths. The systems themselves may feel overly familiar for some people, but it's the meaning behind using them that elevates their impact, which is exactly what the game nails with impeccable fluency.
お前は腕が立つが、怒りのあまり真の敵を見誤ったな。憤怒の舞はもらい受けた。
Looking at it through the lens of hindsight, it's remarkable how well Ghost of Tsushima holds up years after its original release. Regarded by many as a masterpiece in a landscape where open-world titles age like milk the moment the next big thing drops, Ghost of Tsushima was a Game of the Year contender for a reason, having retained its status as a passion project that came to life, even if it comes with a AAA badge. Its visual presentation remains stunning, its combat system sharp and intuitive, and its world continues to invite exploration with very little in the way of artificial padding. More importantly, its identity hasn't blurred with the years, remaining a distinct, confident work rather than a relic of its era, and it's easy to see why it became such a cultural touchstone for many players. It delivered an experience that was both mechanically satisfying and thematically resonant, something that remains rare even today.
やめてくれ。姉さん、 バカ。何もされなかった。
Across its generous runtime, hovering comfortably around the 40 to 50 hour mark for a standard playthrough, it gives players enough space to breathe in its world and gradually master its systems without bloating itself senseless. Aside from its humongous size, the island constantly pulls at your curiosity. Whether you're petting foxes, chasing birds, honoring shrines, or getting ragdolled by black bears, there's a near endless demand for your attention. Although the pacing isn't flawless, with repetition creeping in through samey encounters and not so varied objectives, the steady sense of progression keeps the momentum alive, ensuring the experience remains engaging long after you have exhausted everything it has to offer mechanics-wise. The story itself threads its way through a simple but powerful premise, honor clashing with survival and traditions training against necessity. Notably, it doesn't rely on cheap twists, and although it's not the most unpredictable narrative, the execution is what elevates it, with standout performances and a rich lore that culminates in an outstanding movie-like experience. Similarly, what makes the ending particularly striking is how well it mirrors the opening act. The early hours frame Jin as a man upholding rigid codes in a black and white world, while the finale forces him to confront the gray spaces that emerge when those codes no longer serve their purpose. From a value perspective, it's hard to argue against what's offered here. Between its main storyline, side quests, mythic tales, exploration incentives, and world-building elements, the island never feels barren. It's a compelling single-player adventure with a side taste of multiplayer that respects your time without treating you like a productivity machine, delivering a full-bodied experience without leaning on endless post-game grinds or artificial padding to justify its price tag. That clarity of vision gives the game a timeless quality. It knows exactly what kind of experience it wants to be, and it commits to it without hesitation. Even in a landscape where open-world games shifted towards an abundance of half-assed experiences that are forgotten as soon as the credits roll, Ghost of Tsushima's approach feels beyond refreshing. Its elegance lies in creating true value in understanding the strengths of its genre and elevating them with finesse. What might have felt like an average experience at launch now comes across as spectacular craftsmanship, and one that's infinitely more memorable than many of its strange shades in contemporaries that nobody talks about anymore. As a completely new IP back when it first launched, Ghost of Tsushima carried no legacy to uphold, but it quickly carved one for itself through sheer quality and a distinct identity. In the years since, it hasn't faded into obscurity, having aged gracefully, largely thanks to its timeless art direction and combat that remains tactile and satisfying to this very day. With Ghost of Yotei now out, it's fascinating to see how the original still stands as a benchmark for what Sucker Punch accomplished. A bold debut that didn't just succeed commercially but set a high bar for whatever comes next in the series' lineage. All that being said, Ghost of Tsushima is an easy recommendation for anyone with even a passing interest in samurai fiction, open-world adventures, or a cinematic storytelling that doesn't drown itself in boring gimmicks. Action fans will find a combat system that rewards finesse, while exploration-minded players will lose themselves in its handcrafted landscapes. Those looking for radical innovation may find it a touch conservative, but for everyone else, there's not much to say other than it is an amazing game overall that doesn't need to scream about being packed with never-seen-before features to be unforgettable. It started as a PlayStation exclusive that then made its way to PC, peaking as an universal acclaim in both platforms, and that's all you really need to hear. Although it is not immune to the occasional blemish, Ghost of Tsushima remains a visually stunning adventure defined by style, precision, and emotional weight that has etched its place as one of the best open worlds of all time. For more reviews like this one, consider subscribing to avoid missing out on the analysis each month, and I swear you will not regret it. Also, liking and sharing the video is very much appreciated, and feel free to leave a comment as well if you want. I always read everything, and your feedback is what helps me improve. As usual, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. Until then everyone, please take care.